things that we talked about last week and make them more definite. Today I want to have time for all of the questions. We're leading into a couple of lectures that are very complex, and I think it's better for us to go slowly and make sure we have time for all of the questions. The things that we're doing are things that are hard to apply to your own families. So for today at least, we're going to leave all the time we need for all of the questions and not rush through them. And as far as the exercises go, we'll do it in a different way, but not today. In other words, today we're just going to stay together with the program, with the information, and try to make sure that we can nail down all of the questions so that we feel that we're moving together. The next step is more complex than the one we're doing now, so we want to be able to hold it all together. Okay? So that's the plan. Now, you remember this family? For those who found using the names of Moshe Rabbeinu's family offensive, so we're calling them something else today. That probably wasn't the best joke. It used to work in other places, but not here. So anyway, this family that we met has an aneurysmic boy, and there's a couple of points that I wanted to clarify. This is the first point. You see, there's a lot of different triangles, right? In other words, you have a family with just two grandparents and two parents and three children. It's not a large family. And if you look at the possible triangles, you get a huge number of them. So how do we decide what's the central triangle? And what's the importance of deciding on a central triangle? Is it true that the only thing that matters is the triangle of, because we simplified it to Amram, Moshe, the father, the mother, and the aneurysmic 6-year-old, right? So we said, well, that's the central triangle. But what's the meaning of saying that's a central triangle? Why would we say that when there are all these other triangles that are there? What do you folks think? Yeah.
What's most
Just talk a little louder.
What's most What's most problematic for the family?
Right.
The family selects what is most important.
Well, the family presents itself in the sense that the two parents are complaining about an aneurysmic boy. They haven't mentioned grandma, they haven't mentioned the other grandma, they haven't mentioned the other kids. So you could say, well, we're not choosing, they're choosing. You know, the simplest way to look at it is that there's two parents and a problematic child. And so if they presented it that way, we would say that's central. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Perhaps the triangle is the symptom that's really demonstrating or leading to the function, to the ultimate function of the family, and everything else is playing out around that.
Okay, so another way to say is that it's true that they've said these are the three people involved, but if they've said that, then all the other triangles maybe are connected through it. In other words, the central triangle is the one that keeps the other triangles problematic. So if we solve the central triangle, we'll solve the other triangles as well. Why do we want to solve triangles? Who cares about triangle? It says in the Torah you have to open triangles. Why do we want to what?
Why?
Yeah, why do we want to open triangles?
You don't have relationships one-on-one.
Thank you. Oh, right. In other words, if you keep triangles, you diminish the co-creation in dyads, right? The triangle is a way that people avoid each other. The boy and his father don't talk. They talk through his relationship with his mother. The father says, your mother's spoiling you. Instead of saying, I don't seem to know how to talk to you, right? So opening triangles is what allows the family to grow. If you want, you could say the level of differentiation the family can grow when a triangle is opened into three dyads in which co-creation is possible in each of them, right? That's what we've been talking about all along. So we have this triangle. Now, what happens if we talk with the father and the mother and the child about the aneurysm, and the father keeps saying indirectly that This isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. My mother understands more about this than anybody else, and she says that it isn't going to work, right? And she's not in the room. So now what are we going to do? Because we have another triangle that's open. It's the father, his mother, and his wife. Nobody there is wetting the bed. Not the father, not the mother, not the grandmother. So what are we going to do about that triangle if that shows up?
Ask him about it.
What's that?
Ask the father, like, how does it affect the grandmother, and how does it affect her as probably also, like, open up the
Right.
understanding of what it means to the family.
Right. Now, this is something clinical that's come up that you're familiar with. Has it happened to you already? That, the problem in the room is this kid, and somebody else is invited in, as mentioned, as significant. And so now we're going to ask the father, what do we want to ask the father? We want to ask him, now, see, we could be thinking, how is the grandmother one of the causes of the enuresis? We could be thinking, how is the relationship with the grandmother stabilized through the enuresis? So we would have a triangle of the father, his mother, and his son. Yeah, what were you thinking? Think out loud with me now. What's the importance of this grandmother? Yeah.
She's stabilizing the triangle in that she's not allowing any room for the triangle to move.
Right. In other words, this is what's called circular questioning. It's more or less what you were raising. It came up in family therapy. It took 30 years of family therapy. It's 30 years ago, but it took 30 years of family therapy to come up with this understanding of what's called circular questioning. Circular questioning is neutral. In other words, we're not trying to nail something down. We're saying how the symptom works. So wait a second. Dad, your son has a wet bed, and then who do you talk to? Turns out he doesn't talk to his wife. He talks to his mother. So then we say, well, when the bed is wet, father has something to talk about with his mother. Now, what on earth does that have to do with anything? Right? So then the question would be, what else does father talk with his mother about? And would it be, see, if we're looking at the child and we have this sort of stance, which we need to sort of be flexible about, which is stop talking to grandma and talk to your wife. What kind of a family is this, right? But we want to be a little bit more flexible than that. We want to say, that's interesting. So let's think about your relationship with your mother. You see, we put in the fact that grandma is a widow, and that dad is the only son, there's 2 daughters. And so we go back a generation and we say, well, there's something good about this. It's good for them, we're not judging good and bad. It works well for the family, it's necessary for the family. There's something the family needs that they get by way of wet sheets. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Wet sheets are a bad thing. Dad talking to grandma is a good thing. So how should we think about that? See, if you think out loud, you'll get this better than if you try to read it. So what should we do? The symptom, the wet sheets, is something good for the family.
Does he help dad and mom figure out something else to talk about?
Dad and mom figure what?
Something else to talk about and spending time together talking about something else.
Going a little fast, and I don't think the recorder's getting it either.
If they can figure out how to spend some time talking about something else, then their relationship.
Dad and grandma. Okay. So we say, well, is it possible for this positive function to be preserved not by way of the symptom, right? In other words, let's say that Dad's boy was getting good grades. Does he talk to his mother when his son has good things instead of problematic things? That would depend on their relationship, wouldn't it, right? In other words, she's used to being, let's say we have a generation here with mom and the 6-year-old, which is a bit infantilizing. Doesn't have to be. That's the family that we got. That this mother lives through the boys being problematic. And so we say, is this the first generation that mothers have lived through their sons being problematic? Oh, well, how about that? In other words, a dad has a mother who talks to him about his problems. They've been doing that for 40 years. That's what they talk about. They talk about his problems. And as a matter of fact, if we would look at what we used to go on with Grandpa Zal, it turns out that it looks sort of the same. In other words, the dad here has been a problematic son for his mother, and being a problematic son for his mother, he's kept her as a mother. He's kept her mothering function alive. And so she tells her, neighbors, Gewalt, my son, blah, 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 but that's not a bad thing. It's something to talk with your neighbors about, right? In other words, Gewalt is it's a sort of a neutral word. It's a way of connecting. It's a connecting between people. Gewalt is not necessarily something is all bad, because you may need to be saying Gewalt about something. So Dad has been providing Grandma for 40 years with some Gewalt. And so now we say, well, when your son is doing well, what happens? And we're doing a circular questioning, saying, what does Grandma say? Grandma says, I'm worried. Why does she say I'm worried? Because she always says I'm worried. That's how she lives. She's always worried. She's worried that it's not going to be good next year. She's worried that maybe something, she's pretty worried that Mom is probably not such a good mom. She's certainly not as good as Grandma was, and this competition's been going on forever. So now, you see, I say, oh, well, if the 6-year-old stops wetting the bed, the central triangle will be solved. Well, not in every family, right? In other words, when we say, let's say the teacher that Milton Erickson did, right? And then the kids stop bedwetting. What happened to the relationship of Dad and his mother when the kid became dry? Erickson didn't know because he didn't ask, right? Let's say if the kid stayed dry, what would it probably mean? It would probably mean that that other part, Dad and his mother, they resolved it themselves. We didn't see it, we didn't ask, they did something themselves. Why would we say that, right? Maybe the kids stopped wetting the bed and Grandma is about to suicide. She's locked up in a mental hospital after depression. Why? Because her grandson is dry, right? And so she has nothing to talk with herself about. So if the bedwetting stops, what would we imagine happened in this other triangle? Use your imagination. What do you think would have happened?
Maybe they found something else.
Oh, hold on 1 second. We have these chairs that make a lot of noise. So the chairs will make noise and then we'll go, yeah. But
Maybe they found something else to complain about.
They have to find something else to worry about.
okay,
Maybe,
so
Aaron will know.
okay, so there's a couple of possibilities. Some of the less good possibilities are that the symptom moved elsewhere. In other words, that the fixed matter is that Grandma needs something to say Gewalt about, and the only question is what's the latest Gewalt. And so bedwetting has gone away, and now she has another grandchild who God knows what, or maybe Dad gets depressed and then he needs his mother's help, or maybe he quits his job and then his mother has to spend money on whatever. In other words, somebody becomes more problematic instead of the bedwetter. Would that be a good result?
That's true.
That doesn't sound like a good result. And the question is who we treat, right? Because if we say, look, we want dry sheets. That's the goal of the treatment. We want dry sheets. And now, we get those kinds of treatments all the time because, instead of wetting the bed, the kid doesn't listen in class. And the school says we need Ritalin, right? The school in Israel, copying America, is allowed to prescribe Ritalin. The doctor is just, the hand that automatically writes. So we need the kid to be focused. So you get this pressure, right? This symptom has to stop. So, okay, now he sits, maybe not learning, but he's not bothering anybody. And, okay, so now the symptom shifts somewhere else. Is it a good result? Depends on our focus, what?
The kids are fine.
Well, the kid may be okay, or maybe he feels guilty now that dad is depressed. We don't know. It depends what we look at, right? So you see, there's a problem when we look at the central triangle. It's a certain kind of a choice. And for it to have been a good choice, we might want to say to dad, okay, so now you're out playing soccer with your boy, and he's dry, and mom has moved on to seeing him as more of a bigger child. And what's going on with your mom? And he says, I have to tell you, I don't know why. I can't explain it. But I had this talk with my mom. I suddenly realized that my son was like me and my dad. And I said, that wasn't good for me. Why would it be good for my son? And I said to my mom, you know, he's 6, he's a big boy. I'm 40, I'm a big boy. I'm a big boy. Can we do that? And mom said, I've been waiting for you to say that. And, you know, your father is no longer with us. And we need to, what you would say would be, we need to recreate our relationship, right? Because I'm 70 and you're 40. Nothing's over. Things are still moving. How do we want to live the rest of our time that we have together? And so, dad and grandma co-create something new. Would that be a good result? See, that's where a central triangle makes sense. A central triangle makes sense, thinking in terms of Bowen, when you resolve the central triangle, there's change in each dyad, so each member of the dyad has become somewhat different, and takes that difference to other dyads, right? So why do we deal with the central triangle? Because it gives us a focus we can work on the assumption that change that's created in each of the dyads means that each member of the dyad, like dad and mom is a dyad, each member of them, dad as an individual, who's involved in other dyads, that's called other triangles, right? He's involved in a relationship with his mother, is able to make a change based on the change that's happened in the central triangle. You follow that? That's when we say working on the central triangle is effective. It creates a level of differentiation that rises in the entire family. Yeah.
It sounds very easy when you're saying it and when you're telling the story, but when you are sitting with people in a session, like you don't like you really have to think 1 second. So which triangle might be involved in the central triangle? It's like a lot of things. And if the father doesn't tell me, oh, I speak to my mother. So you have to have in mind, I have to ask him who he speaks to. Like there's a lot of things that you have, like actually till you get the whole picture might be many sessions.
Schwartz is I'm a family therapist. Family therapy is not an easy field. It's a field which may be disappearing because of those kinds of difficulties. In other words, all therapists like to focus on what they want to focus on, right? The therapist makes certain choices, and that's lawful. In other words, we're human too, so we have to figure out what we can work with. So we say, okay, you know, Bowen said a central triangle, and Haley said you can work on a symptom. And so, you know, Flashman said you can work on the central triangle through the symptom. Okay.
You have to do a lot of homework, and you have to have a lot of things in mind. You can't be in the, you can't, I don't know, like, you know, like,
Right.
when you sit in the session, you can't actually think of all those things.
Right, nor do you have to. In other words, if we're going to do the central triangle and do this is what's called a strategic intervention. If you recall, the definition we're using here of a strategic intervention is that we make things happen simultaneously in each of the dyads of the central triangle. That's already a lot, right? 3 things have to happen simultaneously. That's a lot on the plate, right? Is it the entire family? No. No, and when you work with large families in close, you know, like, let's say if dad comes from a sibship of 8, and so does mom, And so these grandparents, there's a lot of people to think about, right? So we're not going to think about all of them right away, but we will hopefully ask ourselves after we get dry sheets. See, we got dry sheets, right? And then the question is this good or bad that we have dry sheets, right? In other words, what does it do? Does it actually work only in the central triangle? Well, your answer is that there's no such thing as something that works only in a small part of the system. The question is, when you make a change in one part of the system, how does it generalize? And who does the generalizing, right? So in a good situation, and this you'll learn from families, you'll learn it from families. You know, the kid comes in, he goes to PY, he's a bedwetter, right? And we'll talk about bedwetting in a minute. He goes and he talks to a therapist for an hour. Donald Winnicott used to see kids for an hour. And maybe I'll tell you how it used to work, so you'll see how that might work. And after an hour, the kid goes home. He has the parents come in for an hour, he shows them what the kid drew, and the kid stops wetting the bed after an hour, right? And so we would say, how do you pat yourself on the back, you know? You would say, I'm a wonderful therapist. Look at these dry sheets that I produced. Or you could say, the family must have been very close to ready for it. And if the sheets stay dry, the family is doing the rest of the work. The family is doing the rest of the work. In other words, Dad will go and talk to his mother on his own time, but it'll happen. In other words, as he becomes a different father, he becomes a different son. Does this appeal to you at all? Think about your own families. One change happens and then that's it. As long as the sheets are dry, nothing else has to happen. That would be pure regulation. Regulation is first order change, dry sheets. The rest happens in families when they can do the rest. Some families can do the rest, and some families can't. I'll give you an example from Winnicott to give you sort of a picture of it. Winnicott was a pediatrician who became a psychoanalyst, but stayed a pediatrician. And so he said to himself, how many kids in my practice can come to see me for psychoanalysis 4 days a week? It's close to zero. It's a very small number. So now what are we going to do with all the other kids? So Winnicott developed this system called Squiggles. I don't think that Barbara talked to you about it, did you? She did? Oh, good, okay. So Winnicott developed a system called Squiggles, which is based on the following notions, which are worth knowing. Notion number one, the child has dreamt the person who can help him. The child has dreamt the person who can help him. That's the first assumption of Squiggles. Now, what does that mean? It means that families want to change. The families will facilitate their own change. It means that we, at most, are a shaliach, right? In other words, that we are not getting that family to change, we're facilitating what they want. The child has already dreamt the person who can help him. The thing that, number two, which is a derivative of that, is that I probably shouldn't I shouldn't interrupt that. I should let that happen. If he's going to make me the person who he needs, so I should let him make me the person who he needs. So in other words, I should more or less keep my mouth shut. In other words, let the kid move along. That's going to be true in families too, right? The third assumption is that the child will get to his dreams if I find a way to move with him. And in his dreams, he'll tell us what the trouble is. And the fourth assumption is that the way to have the child experience a safe situation in which he can get to his dreams is one of, in our current terms, co-creation. In other words, the room is the room of co-creation. What you create in the laboratory of Squiggles is something where you and I co-create. Now, how does a therapist co-create with an 8-year-old boy? And the answer is, you take a piece of paper, you both have pencils, equal, right? You say, one of us is going to close his eyes and let his hand make some sort of a form. In other words, release your unconscious. but indirectly. You're just going to squiggle something. Just close your eyes, let it go. One of us will do it. The other of us will try to make it into a picture or a story, and then we'll switch. And so you have Winnicott closing his eyes, letting his hand go, and the child creating that into a picture, right? And then the child squiggles, and Winnicott, trying to say to himself, stop being a psychoanalyst and just play with this kid, makes it into a picture. After a certain number of rounds of that, he starts to hint that dreams would be useful, and the kid remembers a dream. And in the dream, the kid remembers what's been missing in his relationship with his family, right? And what's missing in the relationship with his family is some feeling that he wasn't able to express, right? Some feeling that he wasn't able to express. For example, I think I would like to kill my younger sibling. For example, that's a common one. There are other ones. The first case is one where I want to kill my older brother. But the second, let's say, but why couldn't you say that? Why couldn't you say that? And the answer is because I was sure that my parent wouldn't hear it. Why were you sure? Because I tried and it didn't happen. Do you remember when you tried? No. I gave up pretty early, right? So the child now, by the co-creation that's happening in the room, is in touch with something he wasn't in touch with before. In whom? In himself. Oh, well, that's very nice. It's in himself. Is that going to create a change? Something that's happened in himself? The answer is not yet. Not yet. So the child has had this experience in the room with Winnicott, this strange 70-year-old bald guy who squiggles on papers with him. And the kid goes out. The next thing Winnicott does is he says, okay, brings the family in. And he tells the parents, look where your kid got lost. There's something he wasn't able to tell you once upon a time. And those parents say, oh, he was right, we were preoccupied. His younger sibling was a preemie, he was in the hospital, we were busy saving him, we weren't free for this, blah, blah, blah. But we are now. Oh, you are now. Fine. Goodbye. Treatment over. 2 hours. What happens? What happens after that? The treatment hasn't happened in the room. What happens is the treatment has made possible a co-creation that wasn't possible before. The child can now say to his mother, this is what I felt like. And she can say, well, I love you just the same. I can understand that that's part of you, right? And so you don't have to hide it from me or from yourself. So they've moved. It's a moving moment, literally, emotionally. It's a very moving moment for mother and child. Does it happen in the room? Not with Winnicott. It happens at home. So what he's done is help to put wheels under the child because of what happened in co-creation in the room. The parents because of what happened between him and them. And then they meet each other with wheels. They're able to do something different. And so something changes. Now, what families can do that? Can all families do that? Right, you see, so this is an example of where you say we're setting things up for something to happen when we assume that the family can take it the next step. That the child has dreamt what he needs to help him, that the family can then take it the next step, and mother will not freak out when he says it, and the child will not freak out when he has something to say. And so they can heal together. That's a good way for a pediatrician to think about the other 9,000 patients who aren't able to come to psychoanalysis. Yeah.
I just have one question about this hypothesis that he had, that children have for sure dreamt who can help them in the family.
Right.
I found that hard to believe, as in
Say that what?
I find that a little hard to believe, or I guess I just don't understand it properly.
Everybody finds it hard to believe. Everybody finds it hard to believe. Now, when will it become possible to believe it? When you meet children and you see that it happens. But if you don't think that that could happen, it won't happen, right? In other words, what Winnicott had to do is to say, look, I'm a psychoanalyst, but not here, right? Not now. Here are the things I'm not saying. So in his, he wrote the whole, his 25 cases that were written, verbatim, all the pictures, and what he said, and lots of what he didn't say. Because he said, look, if this were psychoanalysis, I would be doing blah, 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 but we're just co-creating now, because we're assuming that this child can take it one step further. So, now, Is it true that all children can make use of it? No, he has a whole book about children who can't make use of it, right? But there are children who can, right? So that's what we're talking about here. We don't want to generalize from one case to all cases. We don't want to generalize from how you work with the central triangle with one family to how you work with the central triangle with all families. You see, Winnicott took in this 6-year-old boy and didn't meet with the family and didn't think about the triangle. But he co-created a change in the individual, where the individual then changes his relationships with mom and dad. And that means that the central triangle the differentiation has increased. Now, does he know what happened to grandma? He's a psychoanalyst. He didn't ask about grandma. We're family therapists. We look at Winnicott and say, what a marvelous piece of family therapy. It's a piece of family therapy. Because what he's worked on is the relationships. He's freed individuals to be able to co-create in their relationships. He took his nose out of it because in some cases they were able to do the rest of the work. He didn't say that it's true of all cases. He didn't say this is the way you have to work with all children. But he said, my goodness, it sometimes works. My goodness, it sometimes works. It's not bad. It's about as good as it gets in our field. Yeah.
Can you give an example of how that would work with a 6-year-old child working with Winnicott? Because how can a 6-year-old child co-create and change the dynamic in the family? I don't understand.
In which family?
In their family, anyway.
An example of what would happen?
So
I don't understand the question.
you're saying that by Winnicott working with a child, let's say a 6-year-old child,
Right.
then the child can go back to their family and co-create and change the dynamics. How
Okay,
how's
so
that possible?
let's...
Especially in the 50s or whenever he was working, when the whatever zeitgeist was children should be seen and not heard, and there's a lot of strict rules and discipline. I can't understand how
Okay.
a child would change the
So
dynamics.
let's ask a question. The 6-year-old comes in and meets this stranger and has dreamt the person who can help him, okay? And Maria's saying, I'm not so sure all 6-year-olds, you're also saying, right? That there are 6-year-olds who will come in and won't do anything in the room, right? What's the most useful question to ask the 6-year-old who sits and doesn't say anything? The most useful question is, are you sure that your parents want you to do this? Are you sure that you have your parents' permission to say whatever you have to say? Are you sure that your parents fully allow you to do whatever comes up in the room with me? In other words, to create the person who can create change. So there will be many children who will say, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, right? Winnicott on those children said, well, we can't treat them that way. We as family therapists say, oh, well, that's no surprise. This is a family that needs some family work before we do the individual work. Or maybe if we do the family work, we won't need to do the individual work. That's a question. But the child doesn't have permission to come in and make me the shaliach of his parents, right? No child can create a trusting relationship with an adult, and actually no family member can create a trusting relationship with the therapist. Think about your individual clients. Unless they have some hope that it's not going to destroy the rest of their relationships, right? In other words, a wife who comes in and says, I want to work on my anxieties, has a sense that she has her husband's permission to work on whatever it is about her, including about him, that could be connected to the anxieties. Otherwise, who is she going to choose? A relationship with her husband or a relationship with a therapist? Pretty easy choice, right? And we don't want people to need to make those choices. So when we say that people come in for individual therapy and then it can change and co-create, what we mean is that the family is differentiated enough to free individuals to go on some sort of experiment, because those individuals feel that the family is capable of moving with them, that the family is capable of making changes. In other words, you don't go and open your heart to a therapist and say to yourself, okay, that's the end of the rest of my relational world. But we have some cases like that, people coming in with a cutoff from their family, and they say, I need to talk about myself, I don't have a family. Those are tragic cases, and usually we say to them, we could hope that as we progress, you may find a way to have a family, right? But people who use therapy, or a therapist who says, well, the first thing you have to do is drop all those other people and just be, in this treatment. The only place where that really worked is when people came in 6 days a week, right? And saw Freud. They saw him a lot more than they saw anybody else in the world, right? And it was for a short period of time. And so it was sort of like a laboratory. But when we see people for an hour, and then they go home 24/7 with their other relationships, and we say to them, those relationships aren't good for you, or they start to realize in the room there's something troublesome in those relationships, they're out of here. They're not going to stay in the treatment. So we need to be looking, what Gracie was saying is that we need to be looking with multiple focuses. In other words, we need a magnifying glass to look at what happens in the room, at you together with me. And we need all the other lenses out to the telescope of at least, as Bowen said, 60 folks in 60 years. In other words, a couple generations. Well, we can't do it all simultaneously, right? So we try to focus on what we think is useful, and we say to ourselves, if we're running into trouble, it could be that we haven't used the full enough focus, that we've looked at mom, dad, and the wet sheets, and we haven't looked at grandma. Now, when somebody comes in, you immediately say to dad, well, tell me about your relationship with your mother. Psychoanalyst is lying on the couch, that's what you're going to do. You say, yeah, your kid, that's another story, tell me about your mother. If he's able to do that, and to come to realize, oh, I'm recreating my relationship with my own mother, with my child, and I'm going to change both of them, that's when we say Gesundheit. The rest of the therapy goes on outside of the room. People do it. They change their relationships. When it doesn't happen, then, the psychoanalyst says, look, you're resisting, you don't have dreams, and you don't talk about your mother, and all you talk about is the wet sheets of your 6-year-old boy. What kind of psychoanalysis is that? Freud doesn't know anything about your child's bedwetting. So get to the point, and he's out of here, right? Because he needs to protect those other relationships. And he thinks that if he changes in himself, he'll lose his other relationships. So you see what we're talking about? It's not that we need different lenses. Clients come in with different lenses. They come in with the teacher at the back saying, make your kid focus for school. And they come in with all these other relationships, which might change for the better or might change for the worse, depending on what co-creations are possible and how we help them with the co-creation. Okay? So I see that this idea, this is why I wanted to slow down a little bit in our focus. The idea of the central triangle is not a simple idea at all. Yeah?
Can you repeat this last thing you said? I didn't really hear you.
What's that?
I didn't really hear you repeat the last statement.
The last statement was that when people come in, they're thinking about how they feel in themselves when they wake up in the morning, how they feel to the people they see in the morning in their nuclear family, how they feel about the rest of the family. And they don't talk about it all at once, but that's on their mind. In other words, anytime you say to somebody, could you have a different thought about something? Let's say you do CPT, right? So you say, well, you have this way of thinking. Could you think in a different way? Every client says to themselves, I can, but my grandfather can't, right? Or they say, I guess my grandfather could. If they go along with us, it means that they think that in their family, these thoughts are not going to destroy the rest of their relationships. And if they say, I don't have any other thoughts, and thank you very much, but we got 12 sessions and we're finished, then it could well be that they're saying, I don't live in a family where we can make those kind of changes. And you're not helping me because you're stuck with a lens of this kind or that kind, but not with the whole story. People live in the whole story, right? And when people live in big families, they live in a big, complicated story. And they protect that story more than they're willing to make changes that would be dangerous, yeah. I just connected change with dangerous. We'll get back to that, yeah.
I'm wondering, is there some truth to that it's harder for older people to change, like the older you are? So that when people are scared, like, I'll do it, my grandmother will never change, or, my mother's already elderly, she'll never change. I feel like there's almost some truth to that, like, there's space for that fear.
Right. I don't know. It's a common way of thinking. I think, like most common ways of thinking, sometimes it's true and sometimes it ain't. In other words, you can look, if you challenge people, you say, but Dad, bring your mom in. Let's have a chat with her. She's 70, that's really old. So there's no way she's going to change. She's been that way with me for 40 years. Now, 40 years is a long time. Let's think about time for a minute. 40 years is a long time. Because what? Because we think that habits reinforce themselves, or habits are something that people are constantly doing, and since they're constantly doing it, they can stop doing it. They can just stop doing it. They don't have to keep doing it, but they haven't figured out a way that's safe to stop doing it. You'll find people at the range of it, right? Whereas you'll find grandma coming in and saying, I've been waiting for 40 years to say this to my son, grow up. But I couldn't say it to him because my belated husband thought he was a bedwetter, and so there's something the matter with him. And so he told me, don't say grow up, he'll crash. Just and then but you mean I can say that? Huh? And 40 years, the therapist says 40 years of doing something means that you can stop it right now. It's easy to want to, right? And then the man and his mother create a new they co-create a different relationship. Is that possible? Yes. Is there an age limit to it? Not that I know of. Are some people 50 and say I'm too old to change? Yes. And that's a different level of differentiation. They were saying that when they were 10 too. Just adding the age as a way of not. Now, when you start to get to declining function, that's a whole other story. In other words, when you get to people who are really old, 70 is not really old, but when you get to people whose function is starting to decline, then it's also mixed. Sometimes people become very different after their first stroke, for the better. And they sort of let some stuff go. And sometimes you find a certain rigidity where they say, look, I can't afford to say this to myself because, oh my God, if I said that, and no one's there to help them because, there isn't a lot of geriatric psychoanalysis, so there's something to be said for some of it. So they say, look, leave me out of this, right? And then you have more of a problem. And so, for example, Dad's mom was waiting for her spouse to die. That's what now allows her to change. You've probably seen that in some families, right? Neighbors, right? Where a spouse system is stuck. One of them is no longer here, and suddenly you say, oh, look at this, that's really different. So these are the things that are the wider lens. What?
Happens a lot with children.
With what?
With children, waiting for their parents to die before they change.
Right. And then there's a famous joke about these two 80-year-old people who finally get, they knew each other for a long time. They're alone. They decide to get married. And I say, well, why are you getting married now? It's probably not the physical part of it. It's probably not the social. What is it? They said, oh, we were just waiting for our children to die. So, yeah.
This that you're talking about that, if I understand correctly, that applying can only have their children change if you get permission from the family origin. Is that because he's spending most of the time is only an hour within our office? Or let's say they don't spend any time with family anymore, it's just an impact on the family, which means...
Right. It's all of it. In other words, if there's a day-to-day relationship, so you start to change, it's being tested day to day.
Right.
If it's a more distant relationship, so it's in your imagination more, but it's still there.
It's still there.
It's still there. In other words, people think about this, and you see, in one way we say, well, if they're not doing the change that we think they should do, maybe the other partners in the dance, right? Or you could say, maybe when they do the therapy that we want to help them to do, they are able to do the therapy because they are voting confidence in the other partners in the dance. In other words, people have been reading Macbeth for 40 years. It's not a lot of fun. And but that's the family play. So we're doing Macbeth. Somebody goes to therapy and comes in and brings in Midsummer's Night Dream and says, I have this other script. Anybody want to try to do this other script? Some families will say, there is only one script. Our family has only one script. And some families will say, thank God, we're all sick of Macbeth. Finally somebody is going to free us from this and we're going to be able to have a little bit of fun.
It never happened that a person separates himself.
What's that?
It never happened that a person separates himself to change, like from his, so that he can change, he can
Right.
separates himself.
So one of the great questions for human beings, and especially for therapists, who all of us in some ways are involved in personal change that is, the vanguard of the family change. People whose families are changing all the time usually don't become therapists. They're free to do something else. But people who are feeling like, I need to change, and my family, I don't know. So here we are, right? So that's not a small question. And Bowen's answer is that you need to stretch it a bit. In other words, do you feel that you're making change in yourself? Yes. Now, next Pesach, when you come to the Seder, can you do something with that change? Or is it still just your own? Not a small question, right? And maybe not this year, maybe 10 years from now, at Pesach. But can the changes that you're making be expressed in co-creation in relationships, right? Now, is that expressed somewhere in psychoanalysis? Yes. What Freud said, famously, was that when you finish psychoanalysis, then you're off to do what people do in life. What do people do in life? Work and love. So then, wait a minute. So what you've done here in psychoanalysis have to do with work and love. That's like the rest of your life. Shouldn't I be helping you to do that? Well, Freud said, I think if you hang around here too long, you'll become a groupie of mine, and then you won't be yourself. So I prefer that you allow yourself to create and to co-create in your world without your analyst. Because what you've done here in treatment, this is not the treatment we do here. It's a different form of treatment. What you've done here is take something apart. That's why it's called psychoanalysis, right? You've taken the forms of Macbeth. You've taken your role in Macbeth. You've seen it inside out. You've gained the possibility of playing a couple of different roles in Macbeth and maybe in a play or two more, right? Now get out of here, because otherwise you're going to end up creating some kind of play with me. What you need to do is create it in work and love out in the world. Now Freud was dealing with more differentiated patients because he said 5% of the population can tolerate this kind of treatment, right? Where you lie on the couch and use your imagination and say God knows what, and you keep getting interpreted what happened to you when you were 3. Not everybody can do that, right? So the people that Freud was analyzing were people who he thought, he didn't say it that way, but he said, out of here, right? The Freudian way of talking about it is analysis and synthesis. And Freud wrote a paper in 1919 on the future of the psychoanalytic movement, which if you think about 1919, for the 4 years before that, psychoanalysts' sons were shooting at each other across the lines in World War I. So it wasn't clear where this movement, it's an international movement, where it's going, right? And the whole world was upside down after this horrible war. And so he was saying, well, maybe we should do psychosynthesis. Maybe we should help people put it all together. And if we help them put it all together, then that's what people need from us. The interesting article that practically nobody reads. And his answer was, synthesis is not our business. Psychoanalysis takes what was over-synthesized. See, when you were 4 and you had tools of a 4-year-old in cognition, and you were sort of all alone with this because you couldn't talk about it, because if you could have talked about it, it wouldn't have happened. So you decided that your father's going to castrate you if you get close to your mother. That's a 4-year-old thought, right? Now what did you do with it? You synthesized it too much. You put it all together and said that's what a complex is, right? Something that synthesizes, all the pieces are put together. The puzzle is fixed. It's too good, and you can't get free from the puzzle. right? So what do we do in psychoanalysis? Take a chisel, and we say, look, that's what you were for, that's how you thought, that's what I... It doesn't have to be only that way. That's what you do in psychoanalysis. And then the person realizes it doesn't have to be only that way, and they start to feel, well, what way could it be? And Freud says, get out of here and find out. Out of here, right? You have, you've become more flexible. Use it in your relationships. Don't use it in therapy. We don't do synthesis here. Why? Because if we do synthesis here, you're going to be stuck being a Freudian your whole life instead of being yourself. You're going to try to please me and think about how I would do it. I want you to do it the way I do it. Now, Freud had a huge problem with dependency, which was expressed in this issue of, God forbid, we're not going to do synthesis. Don't be dependent on me. I won't be dependent on anybody. That's a part of his. That's part of the central problems of psychoanalysis. But that was his solution. Now, when we do family therapy, we actually do what?
Sorry, I didn't get that. He had a problem with dependency, but he made people dependent on himself.
No, he had a huge conflict, and therefore he did. When you have a conflict, you do both. You say one thing, you do another thing. That's what happens when you have a conflict, right? So he said, don't be dependent. The way the movement went, everybody was dependent. Till this day, as soon as you mention the word Freud, which in German is pronounced Freud, these like Freud. When you say the word Freud, everybody has a transference. Everybody thinks of, everybody imagines everybody has a different Freud. So he had a conflict around the area of dependency. This became famously over in the 1990s in the discussions about his relationship with his latest disciple called Sándor Ferenczi, or Boris Ferenczi, from Hungary. The Hungarian school had a different take on it. And Ferenczi said to Freud, why don't we psychoanalyze each other? Wouldn't that be neat? And Freud said, gewalt. And the Freudians then decided that Ferenczi was mad. And Ferenczi definitely was a genius. How mad he was is a question towards the end. But all of Ferenczi's insights then informed the whole what's called Hungarian school, which deals with relationships and not just with analysis. So we're in some ways influenced by that. We do synthesis, don't we? In other words, unlike Winnicott, who said, oh, you've dreamt the person who can help you, I'll get your family to understand what you've dreamt. We actually see the kid in the room with his mother. Now that's really something, right? Winnicott didn't do that because he didn't know how to do it, right? He had a different way of doing it. We actually do that. It's an extraordinary thing. See, the fact that we take two people and we say, you could change your relationship. Now, when we say you could change your relationship, change involves analysis because it involves stopping something that you're doing. But it also simultaneously involves starting to do something different. And family therapy is always engaged in the creation of new things, and that's why it's so different from psychoanalysis. We are actually doing what Freud said analysts don't do. We do synthesis all the time. We want to see things created in the room. Sometimes things have to be changed before they can then be recreated, but what we want to see is a recreation. For example, strategic therapy is not an analysis. Strategic therapy is a new creation. What we just talked about in terms of, you do this, you do this, you do this. We're not explaining it. We're just saying do it. It's based on an understanding of the central triangle. And we're offering people a new synthesis. And you can say, how can they make a new synthesis if they haven't understood the analysis? And the answer is, it seems that it works. But we still need to look at the different levels, right? In other words, you can say, well, that's what Winnicott did. He just did it in 2 steps. We do it in 1 step. What's the difference? The main thing is that the people recreate, co-create, and do these syntheses together. So, but then we want to look at the question of who else is involved in the play, right? That's where the central triangle is a simplification. And then you ask yourself, is it working? And when we say, is it working, it's not just as the sheet's dry. The question is the differentiation changed, which means is there a change in the relationship in each of the dyads? And then we would say, and if there is, well then, let's say dad and his mom is the new creation that dad is doing with his wife and with his kid, enabling him to be taking that to a new creation with his mother. And the answer will be sometimes yes and sometimes no. That's the question we want to work on, sometimes yes and sometimes no. Now, the way that gets expressed is at the very end of the lecture, and then we'll go back to some other parts, which is, we talked about the strategic therapy, and we said, well, that's nice, we'll just get dad to do this and mom to do this. You remember the therapy, right? Dad is involved with the boy, and mom is less infantilizing, and the parents are able to do something other than fight about the wet sheets. And so the central triangle is changed, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work. And this was the experience that people had in Milano in the late 70s. It's a very important piece of family therapy which isn't taught anymore, but which we desperately need for the clients who are driving us mad. There was a group of psychoanalysts in Milano in the 70s who were dealing with families that nobody knew what to do with. They were dealing with anorexics, and they were dealing with families with mental illness. And they had the following experience. Families would come in, and they would understand the family very well. They would be able to say, oh, it's this way, and oh, it's that way, and isn't that interesting? And then they would give prescriptions. They would say, for example, dad plays soccer, dad and mom celebrate, mom and boy practice their handwriting, and the family would be coming from Roma, and they would go away, and 2 weeks later they would come back. The train from Rome to Milan is a schlep, and these people would come in, and they'd say, oh, and did you do what we suggested? And the family would say, oh, did you suggest something? Had you said something like that? So wait a minute, we taped it, but we'll show you the tape. Here, this is what we said. I said, oh, how about that? Okay, well, why don't you do that again? Okay, so they do the prescription again, and they tell the people, why don't you do this and this and this, and they go away, and they're back to Roma, back to Milano, and they say, oh, well, so this time, what are the results? And the family would say, very politely, say, the results of what? They go, well, this thing that we told you to do. And the family said, well, that's very interesting. Why don't you tell us to do that again? We like that. We like having you tell us to do things. And the therapist is trying to tear their hair out and say, what do you mean you like to have us tell you what to do? We're telling you to do it so you'll do it. And the family would say, oh, we like you to tear your hair out and tell us to do it. That's actually, if we do some more of that, that'll be even more interesting. Now, these are not bad people, but they sure weren't working the way family therapy was supposed to work. And so the people in Milan, and this was quite a group, it was 4 very experienced psychoanalysts. You've heard about them before? There's a group that was head by a woman named Mara Salvini Palazzoli. You'll see her name in the bibliography and in some of the readings. 2 psychoanalysts would sit in the room with the family, and 2 psychoanalysts would sit outside of the room watching this thing behind the mirror. And they would have an hour session, and then they would take a break. And all the psychoanalysts would sit and drink wine and eat pasta and say, what do we think is going on in the family? And they would come up with these brilliant understandings of what's going on in the family. So 4 people, just imagine what a luxury that is. I would hope maybe sometime here in the clinic we could create that kind of a group. When I was able to put together when I was in training, there was a whole other level of discourse. 4 people are trying to figure out what's going on with the family. So you think you really have a good idea, and you go and you tell the family, and the family says, marvelous, thank you very much. And completely, the only word they could think of was disqualify it. So it's like it's erased, like it wasn't there. And you say, wait a second, what is our role with this family? Because they seem to keep coming in, and preserving the family system, right? So then they started to say, well, let's take a zoom out here and say, okay, who are the other participants in the family? You know, let's do the whole deal. They would start to do the circular questioning, and they would find out, for example, that if the 6-year-old would start to be dry, then grandma on father's side would drop dead, and grandma on mother's side would move herself in with another aunt who would then divorce her husband. And then the husband who was divorced would then have to go back to his mother. And so you have this whole system, and they would say to themselves, wet sheets is not the worst thing in the world. That's what they started to say to themselves. They said, well, it looks to me like there's a real importance to these wet sheets. These wet sheets, it's not just a little central triangles in this family. That's not how it works. There's one triangle, another triangle, another triangle, and they're all held together by a couple of wet sheets 3 times a week. And so they said to the family, out of desperation, they said, I don't think you should change this so soon. This is something that needs, some very careful thought. It might need another generation before these sheets could become dry. And you see, Gracie's, that's the problem with these interventions is that you laugh. Now, why do you laugh, right? Why do you laugh? Because you're making fun of your clients? Not these people. It could happen to all of us, but not these people. Because, you know what makes for humor? Things that are contradictory. It's like tectonic plates. That's what Freud said, at least. That when you have this thing and that thing, they don't fit together, but they put a good joke, they crash together in a good linguistic, and then it makes you laugh. The laughter is sort of a sign that things have crashed into each other. So what's crashed into each other? The family is coming. What?
Therapy is to change.
What's that?
I'm answering the question. Therapy is to change, and then
Right. The therapist has just said something absurd. In whose mind? In the therapist's mind. The therapist has just said, I think you're coming here not to change. And you can't say that. You're paying me to change. They come, well, what's making them come in? The sheets, right? So you're coming in and paying and making this whole schlep and investing in order to keep the sheets dry, wet. Wet. And then they began to think and created a thought that needed to be developed past the first level of thinking. The first level of thinking in the 70s, family therapy was informed by what's called game theory. Game theory is something that's not particularly related to families, it's related to other systems. It's an economic theory. There's somebody in Israel has a Nobel Prize in economics about game theory. The idea is that the game sustains itself, and that there's a way in which once a system or a set of interactions is set in place, it has a self-sustaining property just to sustain itself. So they looked at families and they said, it looks like this is a system that needs to the therapist become part of preserving the system, right? And so they said that this is paradoxical. And so they created what was called the paradoxical or the counter-paradoxical school of therapy. They said, if the client is being paradoxical with us, game theory, the client comes and says, we want change. So according to game theory, what will be useful for us to do is to say, counter-paradox. Oh, don't do that. Change is a bad idea. Right? That's how the game theory
Isn't there a problem with that?
doesn't sound right, huh?
Isn't there a problem with that? Because there was like a conscious intention of winning, and that can't be compared to what's going on in the family.
Yeah, it's a big problem with it, because game theory isn't what therapists do. This was, an import, and it's good to export it back. Because if you think about it, and you don't have to think too long to say, what's the paradox? Where is the paradox here? People come in ambivalent about change. Hello? You ever seen anybody come into therapy not ambivalent about change? The people who are not ambivalent about change make the change. They don't come to therapy. They come to therapy because they're afraid of change. And they came to Freud and then they resisted. And so all of therapy is informed by this so-called, it's not really a paradox, it's a simple ambivalence of change. People are always ambivalent about change. And so if you say that, then you say, well, what's counter-paradoxical about saying don't change? It's not really counter-paradoxical, it's a way of understanding what's happening now. The only question is, how do you understand what the family wants from you? So if you're seeing therapy as a game, so it's a paradoxical game. But if therapy is not a game, then you would have to ask yourself, all right, well, what is it that the family wants from me? You know, they say they want dry sheets, but they keep preserving wet sheets. So what's our role? See, there, you then say to yourself, I don't decide what my role is with the family. The family gives me a role. Now, when the family comes and says, I've dreamt who could help me, could I squiggle with you? So I didn't create that. Winnicott even said I didn't create that, I just understood it. The family has given this child the ability to come in and give me this role. I learned how to play it, and it was helpful because the rest they did themselves, right? When a family comes in and gives us other roles, in this case, what role is the family giving me? The family is giving me, this is a hard one to understand.
Regulated.
What?
Regulated.
Is that?
You're regulated.
Regulated, right? That's a little bit, yeah. The family wants me to protect them.
Isn't the family giving you over the responsibility?
What?
Meaning, isn't the family giving over the therapist the responsibility? Like, the bedwetting is now your problem.
You could.
We don't have to deal with it because we're going to see a therapist.
Well, the responsibility is fine, but now the question is, do they want me to succeed or fail? And that's where the paradox is, because they seem to want me to fail. But if I'm failing in changing, so what am I succeeding in doing? It's something like regulation. It's not easy. They want me to protect them from change. Now, that isn't so paradoxical. People actually want us to protect them from change. In other words, they want us to be kind of a regulator so that the change happens in a way that they can tolerate it and metabolize it. And so every therapy is involved in also changing. That's the part that's overt. And protecting from change, which is covert. It's always there. That's what's called resistance, or whatever else you want to put it. Now, this is not an easy term. The paradoxical school never got there. And when they were translated into English in New York, it became a sort of a school where people come in and say, we want our child to succeed in exams, and the therapists say maybe it's better they shouldn't. And that didn't cut so well, and after the Americans dried up the system, it died. And so you don't hear about it anymore. But when it was alive, something else was happening. And I have to say that when I was trying to figure out the different roles that a therapist had, a friend of mine was writing a book, an important book at the time, on what happens in the sexual relations between therapists and clients, which is a big hot number in America, and it's always been a question in every kind of therapy. Because there's an intimate relationship and people, slip or push or whatever. So there's this book called The Intimate Hour, and I said to her, maybe it has to do with different levels and different roles of the therapist. So I tried to write what the different roles of the therapist were, and I couldn't write this one. So I wrote something about regulation, something sort of silly. And since she's a good writer, she rewrote it. And she added in the word protection. And that was the only way that I could see it. So I'm telling you this, not because it's an important piece of history. She added the word, she said, the role of the therapist is to protect them from change, protect them. And I hadn't seen that. When I saw it, I said, well, it's interesting that I haven't seen it because it's pretty obvious. But why hadn't I seen it?
Doesn't protector means avoiding?
Well, yeah. Well,
Avoiding change?
the people used to come from Rome to Milano and said, we want dry sheets, right? The therapist was helping them to keep the sheets wet. That's how it was working. In other words, they would come every 2 weeks, and they were happy to come, and they're happy to pay. And the therapist had one thing in their mind, the family had something else in their mind, which was that as long as we keep going to therapy, the sheets can stay wet. Because we're in therapy about the wet sheets. So as long as we're in therapy, we still have wet sheets. Now, if you say game theory, you're against the clients, and you know that's the problem. That's what Zalman was saying. If you say to yourself, well, there's something dangerous about dry sheets in this family. And then, since the people who were working in Nevada were systems thinkers, they would open up the kind of thing they were looking at. So, well, let's look at grandma, let's look at the cousins, and let's ask all these circular questions. They were doing it before it was called circular questions. Circular questions came from looking at what they did. So wait a minute, if the sheets were dry, let's map dry sheets in your family. If the sheets were dry, what would change? Oh, well, then we wouldn't have to be complaining to grandpa. Oh, well, then, if you're not complaining to grandpa, then what would you be doing with grandpa? He said, well, actually, you don't have anything else to do with him. This is this crusty old guy that, you know, basically tells us what to do about the sheets. And then do you do it? He said, of course we don't do it, because he's nuts. But we talk about it all the time. I said, well, if the sheets were dry, what would happen? He said, well, he just would ignore us. We wouldn't have a relationship, right? So he said, well, you know, maybe a relationship with grandpa is more important than dry sheets for the time being. And the wet sheets are a way of protecting the family system and keeping the relationships the way they are, right? So when you were able to discuss with the family in this circular way all of the meanings of the symptom, in other words, what it not only, the symptom is called the problem, it's because it's outside of the family system, so-called. You remember when we talked about the symptom being the outsider bringing something in, right? Something that doesn't, the insider who brings something from the out, something that's like one of ours, but now he's talking differently about what time to come home at night. So an insider brings something. Here, the symptom is actually a way of staying in the inside, right? It's not changing something, it's protecting us from changing. It's allowing, but in order to protect us from change, what do? We have to go to a therapist. Because somebody doesn't like wet sheets, right? Or somebody doesn't like a kid raising hell at school. So we have to go to a therapist. But we can keep going to the therapist. Going to the therapist is part of the problem, not part of the solution. It protects us from change, right? Because the world is pushing us to change, which we don't feel we can tolerate. See, this is a family that's the exact opposite of a family who says, okay, tell us what you were afraid of, and we'll do the rest. Right? This is a family that can't do the rest. The rest is too heavily entwined because the rest is not connected with one central triangle. The rest really looks like this. It's not solvable. Dealing with the central triangle isn't enough. You'll make the father closer to the son, but that's going to make other things dangerous elsewhere. Usually these are families who've been dealing with trauma over several generations, and they're trying to survive. And the way that they're surviving is what they're sure is the only way they can survive. It's the best way they can survive, at least for now. And the rest of the world is telling them, through their experience, drop dead. Right? The rest of the world is telling them it's more important to have dry sheets than it is to have a family. Right? That's the kind of danger that we're always in when we're doing family therapy. That there's some kind of a change. Who tells us about the sheets? They do. That's the paradoxical part of it. They say, we have wet sheets. And say, well, we need dry sheets, don't you? And they say, well, just keep talking about it. You know, can we keep just doing this for the next 4 years or so? Just keep talking about the wet sheets. Because we need wet sheets. Because something terrible is going to happen. And the family system is, let's say, lower level of differentiation. There isn't much room for procreation. People are simply going to stop being a family. So we need you to protect the family by fussing about these wet sheets so that we can disqualify what you say and we can keep at it. You're part of the game. Welcome to the family, right? The therapist has now become a function of the family. Yeah.
Or maybe this is exactly the same. They could be saying, help us to stop having wet sheets, but still be safe.
Okay. Exactly. So then how do we do that? See, if we say, okay, we're going to get you to the dry sheets, and don't worry, we'll protect you. That doesn't speak to these families. Say, what do you mean you protect us? We've seen worse, you know. You're not the first therapist we've been to, and therapy is very dangerous for our family life. It's an existence problem. And so that's very fine, okay. So you'll tell us that you'll change, we'll get dry sheets and we'll be safe. Fine, keep telling us that. Can we keep this going for about 5 years? Just keep telling us that. That's good, we like that. Because we're in therapy and we have wet sheets. So that's the best of two worlds, it's safe. So if we're focused on the sheets, we're gonna have a problem. Raise your hand, something.
No, I'm just asking that, really, like, as I can imagine, we have not tried, but families with low differentiation will say, "Oh, minute, we're coming for the wet sheets, you didn't help us, we're leaving, we're not staying."
That's what didn't happen in Milano. Exactly. In other words, in Milano, they kept coming because the sheets were still wet.
But that's
Paradoxical. It's paradoxical in a higher level family. See, a family who says we really want dry sheets is a family is sort of saying, and we can make the dry sheets work. The family doesn't need wet sheets, we can make dry sheets work in our family. That's not these families. Those families who can make dry sheets work in their family, do a strategic intervention. It'll work, right? Because you say we change the central triangle and the rest you can do yourselves. We don't even know what it is, you can do it yourselves. Here, you want dry sheets? Do this, do this, do this. 3 things in the central triangle, boom, you'll have dry sheets. And then the question is, can the family tolerate having dry sheets, right? If it works, so then you've done your work. But if the family comes back and says, we still have wet sheets, thank you very much, can we keep coming? So we have an interesting problem. The more that we focus on the dry sheets and the wet sheets, the less we're speaking to the family. So, if you reverse it and say to the family, but you listen to them carefully, you say, look, we're tracking these wet sheets here, and they do an awful lot of things, these wet sheets. It does this, and that's important, it does this, and that's important, and probably does this, and there's no other way that you guys know how to do it. And so we're back not to a central triangle, we're back to all of the triangles. And saying the family's existence probably, for now, needs these wet sheets, right? Now, they've experienced a different therapist, right? What have they experienced? A therapist who understands how the family works. A therapist who's not endangering the family and is able to appreciate that the way the family is right now might be regulatory, might be essential to how the family stays together. And so, we are now joining with them. In other words, any other stance, in a covert way, we're against the family. In a covert way, we're threatening the integrity of the family. You say, we want to help you with dry sheets, and they say, another one of those therapists who just doesn't understand. We're not crazy, we're just trying to, there's people living at the edge of a cliff, and you say, I think, how about if we go forward? And they say, you don't see the edge of the cliff here, do you? They joke about the car that runs on language. Car runs on language that if you say, in Yerushalayim it stops, and if you say Baruch Hashem it goes forward. So that's good, it saves a lot of gas. So the guy gets into the car and he starts to drive. And he's getting faster and faster, and he forgets how to say Emir Hashem and stop the car. And he's getting close to the edge of a cliff. Finally, he remembers, he says, Emir Hashem, the car stops, he says, Baruch Hashem. Right? So that's sort of like these families at the edge of a cliff. And we want to say Baruch Hashem. Thank you very much. That's not what we need right now. But the way to work with these families is to change ourselves. That's where game theory doesn't help us, right? That's where we say to ourselves, can I appreciate as a human being and as a family member in my own family that sometimes changes are so dangerous that we need to protect against changes, even when there's a high price. Wet sheets is a price, it's the developmental price, right? The family as a whole, and the boy who's wetting the bed, feels this is a price worth paying to hold the family together. A couple of wet sheets, a couple of nights a week, and everything buzzes around it, and people are alive. And if it disappears, people are going to disappear. Does this make sense to you? You have clients like that, or neighbors, or something?
Yeah, but how do you get out of it?
So when you say to the family, this may not be the time to change this. It's so well, it works too well And we don't yet know how we can do something that would work better than it. We don't know yet. It's a sort of a mystery. And the family says, what do you mean it's a mystery? Tell us what it is. We say, we don't know, it's a mystery. It is a mystery, because you're never going to see all of the triangles, right? But you say, look, well, for now, we're going to have to help you to protect yourselves, because this change is probably dangerous for you. What happens with those families is when you say, wet sheets may be the price of family survival, the family usually says, they see what you're telling them is what they've been saying to themselves all along. You're not making something up. That's the covert message that's been coming all along from them, that this is how we stay alive. So you say it, that allows them to say, we don't want to do that anymore.
It's like validation.
What's that?
Validation. You're validating
Well, the paradox is by validating the fact that change may not be possible, that allows them, instead of protecting themselves from change, to say, maybe we can. Maybe we really can change. Maybe it's possible to have dry sheets in our family. When the family has given you the role as a protector and you take it seriously, that's when you take the role seriously, it frees them from having to protect themselves. You see, up until now, probably for the last 3 generations, society has been telling them change. This isn't right, this isn't right. We're talking about families that are burdened, right? Stop drinking, stop this, stop that. And they've always been, helpers have been basically, from their point of view, attacking them. All the helpers have been telling them, your family isn't important enough to protect. No, take a risk, and if it falls apart, that's your problem, right? And so what do? They protect themselves, right? So finally, somebody says, you've been doing something awfully important. You're engaged in a terribly important process over generations. It has to do with a family that's committed to itself, a family that wants to protect itself, a family that's burdened with a need to protect itself. And we stand in awe of these wet sheets. It's an act of genius, these wet sheets. Now, if you think about it, every symptom is an act of genius, because every symptom has multiple functions, doesn't it? Every symptom does so many things at once. So what are we just doing? We're saying it does one more thing. It holds the family together. One more part of the symptom. And we wouldn't want this to change lightheartedly. This is not something that you take, sort of simply. Maybe, Professor Pepe thinks that if you take a pill, it'll go away, but he may not have understood the depth of the way that this family is committed to itself, the way that families protect themselves, the way that all of you are part of a group that's struggling to hold yourselves together. We stand in awe of it, enough to say that this is maybe not the right time to change it. Just take your time. Let's say from now until you come back in 2 weeks, do your best not to change. Yeah.
So this concept could be used, let's say, for someone who's drinking. So using this logic, I'm able to tell the person, maybe don't stop drinking. Drinking is so important for you to regulate and to function and to deal with all the stress. Is that?
Right.
Would that be the same intervention?
Is it an intervention in drinking? It's probably not an intervention in addictions, and not an intervention when somebody's literally standing at the cliff and about to jump, where you say, jumping may be a good idea for this family. Right? That's not where we want to go. Would it work in addictions? It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer, because there's no literature about addiction except for 12 steps. So people have stopped writing about addictions except for 12 steps. But if you think about addictions are a kind of regulation. If you want, you could say, well, actually 12 steps are sort of like a paradoxical intervention, isn't it? It says, well, you can't stop drinking. You need to be drinking. You just stop drinking, but you're always an alcoholic. You're always addicted. You can never not be addicted. So just call yourself addicted and don't drink. It doesn't allow you to say the family doesn't need a drinker. You can say, well, the family needs a drinker, but one who doesn't drink. So you be
Well, it's funny because actually I worked in an addiction.
Right.
And a lot of guys get the message, especially from 12-step, that they're crazy.
Who's crazy?
The guys the addicts are crazy, they're insane, they're so nuts that they're drinking so much or they're using or whatever but really, and especially using this logic, it's the most normal thing to do. Because if you have no other ways of regulating, you're so desperate, so it makes sense that you grab onto alcohol or...
Right, so if you take away the word normal, which has absolutely no meaning, and say understandable, human, something that you could imagine to yourself that somebody would do because I can only live in this family when I'm blasted, so, but I want to live in this family, this is the only way, and then they can only tolerate me when I'm this way and so forth. So any regulations, or all addictions are fundamentally regulations. And then there's the question of the meaning of the regulations, right? So see here we're saying this is a regulation, and it has it doesn't have just a small value, it has an enormous value. And I'm going to go away from addictions for a minute. The families that are involved in this feel, they're in a sense of themselves, they feel heroic. They're not just stomp families with wet sheets. That's not how they feel. The families that are stomp families stuck with wet sheets, you do the strategic intervention, and the wet sheets get dry and they do the rest, right? Because they just get stuck on something that they can overcome. These families generally feel, you'll find some of them Holocaust survivor families, and justifiably so, they will say, you haven't been there. You don't know what it's like to lose this family. You don't know what it's like to undergo these things. You don't know what it's like to live in a society where nobody knows what you've been through for a generation and a half. And so this is how we do it. And we don't have a better way to do it, but we're doing something heroic. Few families can do it as well as we do it. And these are some of the incidental costs on the side. And you're looking at us like just some family with wet sheets. Us. We're not a family with wet sheets. We are a family that has been doing things that you couldn't even imagine are possible. And so we have a few wet sheets here and there. But that's usually the family take. It's not usually...
What's this thing that you can't even imagine?
Yeah, how heroic we are. What a huge effort all of us are doing to hold the family together. And so therapists are always in danger of belittling families. It's one of our dangers. People come in and they say, here, this isn't right. So you say, you're right, it's not right. Right? And guess who knows better than you what to do? Yeah, I know better than you how to fix it, because I've been through I don't know how many years of God knows what. And so you're here and I'm there. And paradoxical therapy begins with you're here. And I'm just trying to look at it now. I don't see why you should worry about these sheets right now when they're doing so much good. The stance is different. That's the paradox that people couldn't tolerate. That the therapist looks with admiration at multi-generational family systems where everybody somehow creates unconsciously a way of surviving. And at the edges, the kid hits his mechanech. So that's not good, but that's the kind of price that you pay for the whole family coming together, because when the kid hits the mechanech, so the mechanech is in it, but if you look in the family glue comes alive, right? Because the issue of aggression is now something they can interact with in some way. So when we look at families that way and say, change would be a little small on you right now, the kind of change that you're looking for might be a little dangerous for you right now. That's because we're thinking about you with a capital Y, or you, right? We're looking at you and saying, this is an extraordinary family, this is a heroic family, and most families who are in these situations, that's how they feel about themselves. And if you can appreciate it, instead of laughing at it, and say not that they're a bunch of nuts, but you say that these are people who are at the edge of survival for 2 or 3 generations, and that's usually what you find. There's been immigration, there's been loss of income, there's been mental illness, there's been loss of a lot of losses. People are dealing with more than what the average person can deal with inside, so they deal with it together. And then you say, change may not be the right thing for you now. You've changed everything. And that allows them to say, for the first time, it's true, but we are indeed suffering. Maybe we can do better. Right? So you say, it's not a good idea to take these risks, and that allows them to say for the first time, we can do better. Otherwise, the game of therapy is somebody saying to them, you have to do better. And then they say, oh, you don't get it, but we're just going to protect ourselves. You want to become part of it, we'll come, you'll be part of the game. Do you see the difference? Yeah.
When would you say this and when would you not say this? Is this something, is there a downside to saying this to families if they are more differentiated? That you telling them, if they are higher differentiated and you're telling them don't change, so they'll be like, is there a downside?
Yeah, so this is the topic of the next lecture, and we'll go into it a little bit now, but the question is, how do you know? Right? What makes you say, as a therapist, what kind of therapist does this family need? So you go back to Winnicott's extraordinary intuition about some children with higher differentiation, that families come in telling you what kind of therapy they need. You have to listen. Now, if you're committed to one way of doing it or another, because that's supposedly the way that families have to work, then you won't listen to what they're telling you about, what kind of therapist we need. But they will make you the kind of therapist that you need to be. The only problem is you have to learn how to be a bunch of different kind of therapists, and that's what we're about here. But the simplest way to do it is to try at the higher level. And when it fails, you just keep going down until you get to, but we'll get to that the next time, yeah.
I'm wondering, what do you do with a family that is like kind of mixed? They're such a kind of family that doesn't want to change and they're protecting something, but they, let's say, have one or two gutsy people in the family that say, you know what, I don't care. I realized I got no differentiated, I'm doing something different, I don't care to rock the boat.
Right.
And they will change and they will rock the boat, and the family is doing this protecting what they need to protect.
Right. So those are situations, you all heard the question? You'll see these questions come up in some of the kids who come in the third-year programs who are moving away from their families, more from, less from, but moving away from their family. And you have this question. It's the question of adolescence, which we started the semester with, which is that sometimes the family differentiation cannot stay the same with an adolescent. It can go up or it can go down, but it can't stay the same because the adolescent needs something new in order to keep the differentiation alive at the same level that it was, which is developmentally adequate for him. If you treat him like a 5-year-old, but he's 15-year-old, you're doing the same thing, but the differentiation has gone down because it was adequate for a 5-year-old, but not adequate for a 15-year-old. So a family member comes in and says, I'm making my changes, and you all can buzz off, it doesn't matter to me what you all do. So a lot of times, and some of us have had those experiences ourselves, or close people that are close to us, a lot of times there's a certain period of time when it looks like that's all that happens, right? Where it looks like, the person has experienced, I'm changing and my family's not. And so I don't need them to change, I can make my own changes. That's good for about a half a generation sometimes. In other words, if you look, see, family therapists, we're stuck with a long look. We're always looking at a lot of time, not just today. If we take, but we have different lenses, so with a different time lens, we say, okay, you're making changes in yourself. You're saying to yourself, I have freedom to do it this way, and it wasn't that way in my family. I've taken freedom for myself to do it this way in the family. In my way, it feels right to me. It wasn't that way in the family. It feels right to me. And what the family is doing doesn't interest me right now. I can't afford to pay attention to it. If you look at the broader picture of the family, you can say, well, this is apparently the way the family engages in change. That one person goes pretty far outside, and that person in his consciousness and their consciousness may be outside. But in 10 years when they were children, in other words, you say to yourself, what were we talking about with timeline, right? Okay, so you're 18 and you're moving away from your family and doing things different, and then let's say 15 years from now when you have a kid with a bar mitzvah, who's going to be there? Huh? Or, at your wedding, who's going to be there? This is what you talk with families about, or you talk with young people about. And a lot of times young people will say, that's not something I can think about now. But it's not as if I know. In other words, a lot of young people will say, I can't think about that time. I can see that there is time. It's not, but I'm not thinking about it now. And then you say to yourself, or perhaps with the client, say, If we found a way that when your first kid has a bar mitzvah, your relationship with your family could be different than it is now, would it be something you would want? Right? And most people say it's impossible, but of course I would want it. I want it more than anything else. But I can't make my own changes and think about that simultaneously, in which case you say, okay, so you don't think about it simultaneously, but the therapist thinks about it. We're never free to say, if I'm not thinking about my parents, then they're not here. Because they will be, and they're still there in the background. And that's where you sometimes can say, this is the family's way of changing. That one person says, I'm changing, and everybody else says, we're not changing. And so you say to yourself, this is the way that this family can preserve itself over time. It spreads out, and then we'll see what happens. Does that give you an answer?
Kind of, like...
Kind of is as good as it gets, yeah.
But I'm just thinking, okay, so in some way you're saying that the client should realize it, like that the person that changed has to realize how important the family is.
Right.
But what if, let's take this family and the bedwetter says, you know, I had enough and I'm not wetting my bed anymore because it's not good for me for different reasons.
Right.
The family is like screaming about, our family's falling apart, you can't do that, and they want to keep this.
Right.
So how do you help the family not keeping that kid wetting the bed,
Okay.
but the family's trying to become less differentiated and doing other things that are crazy?
Right.
Yeah.
So here, it's a good question. There were techniques that were developed for this. I'll give you an example, you know, because now you're talking about a 6-year-old, not an 18-year-old, right? And the 60-year-old says, I don't know, I'm not wetting the bed anymore, and he stops wetting the bed. I still owe you a lecture about, a 10-minute lecture about it in your research, so we know what we're talking about. We'll get to that, I'll edit it next time. And so you say to the kid, I'll tell you what, let's do it this way. Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, the sheets are dry. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you take a glass of water, and at 7 a.m., you spill water on the sheets. And stay there for about 10 minutes. We gotta laugh, okay? In other words, you see, and so the kid may say, what are you, crazy? And the therapist says, I'm trying to help you people to survive. If we try it this way, perhaps then everything that happens about your bedwetting could happen without your bedwetting, right? There were treatments where somebody was having hysterical seizures. That's what we started at the beginning last week. And so the therapist, this was Chloe Madar, this is one of the creators in family therapy, said, I'll tell you what, you have these seizures at 3 in the morning. It's most inconvenient for the family to have to get up and deal with a seizure at 3 in the morning. Could you have it at, say, 9:30? And I said, well, I don't control the seizure. Say, I know, but how about if you pretend that you have the seizure at 9:30? And it goes, 9:30 is a little early. So, okay, we negotiate. We get to 10:15. No, look, I can't tell you why, but it's awfully important that this pretending seizure takes place at 10:15 every night. And then the family says, that's really ridiculous. I said, well, do it. And so what does the family do? They don't do it. So now they have neither seizures nor pretend seizures. Right? So that's a way in which sometimes you take the symptom and re-engineer it so that what goes on around the symptom keeps happening without the symptom. That's in a way something like being a dry alcoholic. Right? What goes around being an alcoholic keeps happening without drinking. Now I hope that this has been helpful for you. I had a feeling that this is complex enough that we needed to go at a slower pace, and that this is not like you don't do it in an hour. This is one of these things that takes longer time, so that's why I did it at the expense of the exercise. But I hope what I'm trying to create is a feeling that we're talking to each other. In other words, that I'm not running past you with all this crazy stuff about family therapy, but that it's speaking to you, that you're working at a pace where it's answering your questions, and that you're able to begin to see this is something that belongs to you, because the future family therapists in the Haredi community in Israel and in the world, not me, it's you. That's what we're about. And so I hope that this gives you a sense that this is something you can take a hold on a little bit. And if it seems to be impossible to understand, that probably is necessary for quite a while. And so you may want to walk out of here saying, I don't understand the word. Okay? You got that? Okay.